there's a lot of times now that when I talk to people who either are parents of young children or who are likely going to be parents of young children, hey, get your kids outside to play. Get them involved in multiple sports. They don't need to play one sport early on year round. If that happens later on because of success, okay. But get them in multiple sports year round. Get them outside, let them play, let them scratch their knees and elbows. They'll be okay. I'm not saying to get in fights, but if they get in a little bit of a scrap, it'll be okay. Experience those kind of things, because there are members of our department that have joked, and maybe it's not much of a joke, but hey, we don't need a fitness test. What I want you to do, and they're talking to a young person aspiring to come to West Point. What I want you to do is go climb that tree and then come back down safely. Then go swim across that slow moving river. Then when you get to the other side, pick up a few rocks and throw them at that tree over there and try and hit that target, right? And those are the kind of things that if you're doing those on a day-to-day basis, you're kind of instilling the movement patterns that humans have always meant to have. We're not meant to sit in chairs and lay in beds and eat Cheetos and watch TV. We do that. That's the world we live in now. I get it, but get outside and play. So if we can get kids in a safe environment outside and playing and being creative and using their minds to, connect to their bodies and their bodies to connect to their minds, we're getting closer to what, a lot of early societies did out of necessity. But if we can bring some of that back, I don't know that DP or West Point can influence that, but if we could in some way, that'd be great.
Hey team, welcome back. Drew and Alex here. We're taking you back to school tonight. Alex, who do we have on today?
We are literally taking you back to school. My school, at least. We've got Colonel Nick Gist. He's a career aviator, a CH-47 Chinook pilot. In his Army career, served in command and staff roles at a wide range of echelons, everything from company command to senior staff roles in Iraq and Afghanistan. But why he's on the podcast here, over a couple tours at West Point's Department of Physical Education, he has taught gymnastics, boxing, strength development, golf, alpine skiing, and fundamentals of personal and organizational fitness. Along that journey, he got a bachelor's in life sciences from West Point, a master's in exercise science from the University of Georgia, and a PhD in exercise physiology also from Georgia. He did a lot of research during that, especially on high intensity training, some of it specifically high intensity interval training. His work has been published in the likes of Military Medicine, Journal of Applied Physiology, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, all the big ones. But most importantly, he lays claim to what may be the coolest job title in existence. As of 2015, he became the 27th Master of the Sword, which is the head of West Point's Department of Physical Education. And like I said, just the coolest job title imaginable.
We didn't ask him this, but surely he has business cards that say that.
Oh, yeah.
That has to feel good. What do you do? I'm Master of the Sword. What? I'll say, so I will add this this was a very interesting conversation for me because this is, as a civilian, you know what West Point is, but to kind of get into, we talked a little bit about the history of his program and kind of the things that cadets, including our very own Alex Morrow, are exposed to. Turns out Alex hasn't always been as fit as he is now. And we dive into that a little bit. Colonel Gist, the academic and scholar that he is, actually went back and looked at some of Alex's scores, and we discussed that a little bit. But just a really interesting conversation, definitely a unique perspective at kind of organizational fitness, organizational human performance. And so I think there's a lot of useful takeaways here for folks that are embedded, across the force and different teams and thinking about best practices. So enjoy. Nick, you're on the spot now. You have to tell us all the secrets about West Point.
Yeah.
How does the sorting hat work?
Yeah, I love it. I never heard that. Well, obviously that didn't exist when I was a cadet, but I read the books. So when I was in Iraq in 9-10, my son would read a book and then he would send one to me. And then I guess when I got back to West Point in 2013, I heard that and I'd never even thought of it, that it was, West Point's like Hogwarts.
I mean, I've only seen it in pictures of it. I mean, it looks like it.
Yeah.
Well, we gotta figure out a good starting point here. So I think the question I can ask to start is really what is DPE? Because I've gotten this question before. People have asked me, like, is it like being a gym teacher? Is it academic? Like, what is it? What is like the guiding concept of like what DPE's mission is?
Yeah. So the Department of Physical Education, or DPE, I think if you're an insider, a cadet or certainly someone who works here, obviously what we do. But for someone who's not, hasn't been part of our culture, hasn't been a cadet, they really don't know. So they kind of have these, maybe they don't know anything, like officers that come to work for us that, commissioned out of ROTC. They know kind of what they want to do. But bottom line is what we're trying to develop in cadets is physical fitness and mental toughness. And over time, I've come to really believe that the latter, mental toughness, is more what our program's about. Fitness is it's a daily habit, but mental toughness requires, in most cases, is going to require some external influence, right? So some experiences that are put in front of you that you have to kind of fight through and experience, both success and failure. And then, come out the other side more confident, greater self-efficacy, increased confidence. And our program does that. And I think it does it in a number of different ways. But, some will also joke that we're just glorified PE teachers. Yeah, I've heard that. We've sponsored cadets over the years, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Yodel. It's this anonymous social media where you can post and then people thread off of it. And I've had cadets tell me, yeah, cadets will post that you're just a glorified PE teacher. And I'm like, you got it. I love it. I accept it. I go to work every day. It's a great job. And yes, I get to teach physical education. It's pretty cool.
Well, I think about that a lot. And like people have heard me riff on this, and Drew and I have talked about it before, but I think a really good PE teacher, frankly, can have a dramatic amount of impact on someone's life. And I wish we emphasized it more in like K through 12 education.
Yep.
That like, and you kind of talked about it with the mindset thing. That's what's really being developed. I was just hanging out with a strength coach up here in Alaska an hour ago, and we kind of came to the conclusion that the mindset piece is the most important one. The physical stuff is easy to measure and looks cool on Instagram and stuff, but
yeah, I mean, I've talked about this more lately too, even when I pop into cadet classes, especially with the our PE 450, which is given to cows or our juniors at West Point. And I've heard Kevin Beagleman talk about it a lot too. And that is, we need to do more in our society, or get back to maybe some things that were done, JFK emphasized, where we had, post World War II, we had vets in schools teaching physical education, and in some ways instilling discipline, but also, being role models, exemplars of how you commit to just, maybe it's not even physical fitness, it's just physical activity in general. And if we've got to get that back in our schools, some do it well, some don't do it well, and some don't do it at all. And we've got to get better. As we've heard a number of different times, if you work in DOD or you're around DOD, you read article after article right now about how it's a national security issue.
Well, you brought us to the next point. I was going to ask about the Army struggling with recruiting, the like fitness of people coming into the Army is a risk in terms of the injuries during basic training and all that stuff. Are you seeing that the cadets that show up for cadet basic training, are they less fit than cadets in the past were? Are they more fit? What's changing? What's the trend that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's probably a really good question for some of our faculty that have seen multiple generations. And in some ways I have, I taught in the Department of Physical Education 03 to 06, and then now since 2013. And here's a good thing about West Point. Our admissions process is stringent. We certainly attract a really high quality young man and woman with great intellectual attributes, character attributes, fitness attributes, a desire to serve, a propensity to serve. And we have pretty high expectations in that admissions process. And one of them is the candidate fitness assessment. And that 6-event test, it's been in place for many, many years. Its predecessor was a multiple event test as well. And it's not much different now. But that 6-event test requires that, a high school or post high school or even a soldier show us that they have the physical attributes where they can come in and at least start at a threshold or baseline that sets them up to be successful in our program. That being said, I do see some differences now. And those differences are, I don't point fingers at anyone and how do I say this? I don't point fingers at anyone because we're going to develop them, right? We're not lowering our standards for our 7 physical education courses, our fitness testing, or the requirement to be a competitive athlete at West Point. Everyone's going to have to meet those and still does to graduate and commission, become a second lieutenant. But the path for some maybe it'll be a little more difficult than it was in the past. And I think part of that is kids don't grow up playing the way kids used to. And I simplify it. Kids should be outside, climbing trees, throwing rocks, maybe engaging in sport, but it doesn't have to be formal, organized sport. It can be made up games. And that is also part of, how you develop relationships and how you, deal with success and failure. And I think our society being more sedentary, there's no doubt that our youth are more sedentary as well. And there's a little bit of that we can see at West Point. But again, we have entrance requirements to assure that, not that we bring in the greatest athletes or the most physically fit young men and women, but that they have met a minimum set of attributes so that injury risk can be mitigated and managed, and so that we can start them on a path towards optimal performance. And that's really what we want. And that's a joint venture. That's a joint venture between us as faculty and staff, as well as the cadets and their cadet leadership. There's a self-development pillar there, along with the organizational or institutional pillar that we have for development.
Okay, this might be too big of not too big, but I know this is a big question for this early in the podcast, but you've got me thinking about entry requirements, physical testing. I mean, I have never even been to West Point, but obviously I know plenty of people that went there, and for all intents and purposes, like, it produces excellence in its own sort of microcosm that it's created with history and tradition, et cetera. The question I kind of have as you're talking through that is, how do you take that and blow it out at an Army level? Because it seems like the things that West Point has done so well in terms of selecting the right people, making sure they're physically fit, instilling all these values, are things that Big Army wants to do, but they seem to get it all backward, where PT is seen as punishment. The entry standards are so low. We have to deal with all these people that don't even want to be there in the first place. So I guess within that maybe is this question of, like, is it even possible to take some of that and make it industrial, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I've been at West Point for a long time now. Did have a deployment here and there over the last 9 years since I've been at West Point, but I've been here a while, and so I can't say that I have, current in-depth knowledge of what's going on at the tactical level in an Army, let's say rifle company, for example. You alluded to some things that certainly could be symptoms of a larger problem. I think the demands of our profession are high. I actually was teaching a class yesterday here on character growth. It wasn't even physical education, and the demands of our profession are high, and they need to stay high because the stakes are high. Winning matters, and we hear, Army Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Army tell us winning matters, and we're here to build cohesive teams that are highly trained, disciplined, and fit. To me, that sounds really simple, but if we can just focus on fundamentals, like the fundamentals of how to move correctly, the fundamentals of how to fuel your body correctly, the fundamentals of proper rest and recovery. If we can instill those fundamentals, then we can start to take bigger steps. But ultimately, a large organization like the Army, we've got to stay focused on those fundamentals, and maybe even more so now, again, because where do we draw our people from? Our most valuable resource, we draw our people from a society that has changed. And where we're seeing that, I suppose we're seeing it again based on things I read and understand, that we've had some difficulty recruiting and meeting in-strength goals, but we've got to maintain a high quality, because again, and I'm just going to keep saying it, I guess, winning matters, and you don't win by accident. You win through positive professional habits. And so how I would suppose we do things well. Look, West Point's really well resourced. The Army doesn't have a Department of Physical Education for every brigade-sized element. But the great thing is that the Army, through this holistic health and fitness concept, has begun to move in a direction that is somewhat like, and maybe even I could argue, if we're doing it right, better than what we do in the Department of Physical Education, because of the resources that could be pooled. Now, all that being said, leadership still has to be fully engaged in this process. And that's leadership at all levels. Whether that's, educating through professional military education, our role in educating, training, inspiring here at the military academy, and, commissioning about 1,000 officers each year that then go out, and that hopefully influences formations in the Army. I believe it does. So I think we can do it that way. I think our graduates have an obligation and a professional, like it should be part of their ethic and their stewardship to go out and take all the great resources and opportunities they've had here, and not just share that with the Army, but make it a top priority. People first, right? People matter, and our people are at the heart of lethality, and lethality is the heart of winning when it comes to first deterring aggression and then winning our nation's wars. So I don't have the answer. Bottom line is, I don't have the answer. I'm maybe talking around it, how we outsource it. It requires resources, but if we're going to have a culture shift, and I've seen evidence of that, H2F is a big part of that. The ACFT is probably even a smaller part of that, because it's a component of H2F. But a shifting culture within the Army when it comes to physical readiness and lethality at the individual, team, squad. You see, there was just a best Army squad competition. When you start to see those things, filter out through the Army, it's positive. And I heard someone was listening to I guess an Army senior leader, I won't say his name, today, talking about, well, how do you motivate people? And he says, well, I motivate people through competition. And so I think, that can be done at the smallest unit level, where you use competition as a means to motivate and inspire people to be better. So we have competition at West Point too, a lot. Every cadet and athlete, everyone competes in competitive sports. In some ways, the way that we track everything that cadets do quantitatively in their performance creates a level of healthy competition. We have to have that in balance with our other outcomes. But I think competition's one way that we can get to a place we want to be with regard to soldier and unit readiness.
I'll ask one in terms of like changes that have happened around DPE. You got back there in 2013, which is just as I was graduating, and some of my classmates were among the first people to be kinesiology majors. It's been cool to see like the ramping up in terms of like the number of cadets going through that program, and also the amount of research that's happening, because West Point sits on just an absolute wealth of human performance data. I didn't realize it at the time, but like your first day there, you're going through the hallway where you're getting your uniforms and your duffel bag and all that stuff. And you go to a station and see how many pull-ups you can do. And I didn't like realize at the time that was data collection stuff in terms of like correlating that with performance throughout your time as a cadet. What are you guys hoping to achieve with the kinesiology major? Like, what is that doing for DPE? What is that doing for academics? What's that doing for the Army?
Yeah, I'm just going to admit right up front now, a long-term vision for us. It's difficult to take kinesiology and do really in-depth research and solve big problems without graduate students and a faculty that can be committed to that, right? Time and expertise are both resources. The majority of our faculty are subject matter experts in basic physical education, coaching, human performance, but not at tremendous depth. Let's say, for example, in exercise physiology. Now, we do have a couple of exercise physiologists. We do have a doctor of athletic training. We do have performance psychologists, a couple of those. So I think in terms of a vision, how we can influence the Army is those 16 cadets that graduate with the Bachelor of Science each year with study in depth in kinesiology. That's a group of now second lieutenants that can go out and be a resource for commanders in the Army. I don't know if we're going to get to an MOS or an area of concentration or a branch that within H2F where those officers could help there. The other thing we have each year is we send, about 6 of our officers that finish their 3-year assignment here. They leave with a master's degree and 3 years of on-the-job training in leader development and human performance optimization that can also, if they choose not to stay in their basic branch, could also be a resource for holistic health and fitness in the Army. But I think, in terms of solving, big Army problems with human performance, we've done some partnership, of course, with TRADOC CIMT, but they've done the bulk of the work. But, that Dr. Chip East was behind baseline soldier physical readiness requirement study, and he was a 13-year veteran of our department. Actually began that study on sabbatical from DPE. You've got Colonel Kevin Beagleman, who's been a tremendous resource for TRADOC in the Army and H2F. You've got Lieutenant Colonel Nick Behringer, who's down at Fort Sam Houston teaching, many of the Army's soon to be performance experts in nutrition. You got Major Nick Rinaldi working Army Futures Command on, the cutting edge of human performance projects. So I think there are ways where the Department of Physical Education can influence the way ahead, but I don't want to oversell our undergraduate major for right now. We've got great kids. They continue to do great things in the Army, but I think maybe there's some unrealized potential there. And we'll just have to continue to refine that vision into the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, in terms of the effort to better educate Army leaders on how to lead training that makes sense, having been through DPE's program, at least circa 2009 to 2013, and then having been through the Master Fitness Trainer course and teaching it, I can tell you, because of the time frame you guys have, you're able to do so much more over that period of time in terms of, I showed up at MFT basically knowing just about everything that was taught in that class, because it was taught in a way that's a little bit easier to learn it, because you're doing it over half a semester or a full semester.
Right.
With these classes. I think I hope the current cadets are appreciating how well prepared they are compared to some of their peers in terms of how to lead a training plan for both individuals like themselves and for the unit they're responsible for once they commission. But
yeah,
it's a pretty robust process. I think we've had some conversations recently about how do we get more of that into ROTC, because there's a lot of opportunity, I think. And we've seen some schools do it already in terms of partnerships between kinesiology, exercise physiology programs, and then the ROTC program, because we've got graduate students that want the hands-on experience of training people. They might be interested in tactical as a career. They get to go out there and train some of these cadets. And now the cadets get coaching from somebody who's really knowledgeable. There's a lot of good that could be achieved there if we can build up some of these partnerships and help more of the people who are going to go be junior leaders across the Army learn some of these fundamentals in a structured way.
Yeah. No, I sat in on part of a lesson today in our class. It's called PE 450, Army Fitness Fundamentals. And at its core is Field Manual 7-22. And, but also we use some supplemental material from another organization's textbook. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for cadets to really take what they've learned at West Point and begin to apply it at that, I guess you'd say, master fitness trainer level or that platoon leader level, where you're examining the requirements an organization might have, its essential tasks, what those essential tasks look like physically, breaking it down into components, and then building that back up with the programming knowledge, knowledge of periodization, and applying it in a way that starts to make sense. And so when they leave that class, they've got an 8-week physical readiness training plan that could be the foundation for their first unit. And so, if their company commander has been through that same program here, they can look to that lieutenant and say, hey, you went to West Point. I know you took these courses. Here's my guidance. Go. And they ought to be able to turn it around pretty quick and have a good program if there's not one already in existence.
Do you ever get any dialogue after the fact? So someone graduates, they have this depth of knowledge, and then now all of a sudden they're in the real world, the real army. Do you get any feedback in terms of like areas of improvement, things that might need to change, whether that's from the student's perspective or organizationally, how to better receive folks that have that level of knowledge?
Yeah. We have in years past. I've been part of a couple of trips to the Army War College where we sat down with small groups of former battalion commanders and asked them about their experience with our graduates and across a number of different attributes, not just physical fitness or knowledge therein. But I obviously tune into the ones that are based on our program outcomes, and we get good feedback. It's not perfect, but we've gotten positive feedback. I think that's an area where we can continue to improve and get feedback from those recent company grade officers, right? So lieutenants and captains who can provide us, hey, here's some things you might want to consider. I think what we've done most recently is we've had a few folks go to the Master Fitness Trainer Instructor course, and we're always assessing our courses and our program. And that led us to a point right now where with that class I was just talking about, PE 450, we've made some evolutionary changes to not only bring in holistic health and fitness as a concept, across the 5 domains, but also bring in some of those elements of the Master Fitness Trainer Instructor course that we didn't have or we needed to refine in our course. So various forms of feedback, but we can do even better by reaching out to recent grads.
And we've kind of danced around this a little bit, but I mean, for me as someone who didn't go to West Point, can you kind of walk, and you don't have to go class by class for this, but just from like the first year someone shows up to when they kind of get out, what is kind of the vision mission of your program, and what do you want them to learn, and what does that look like across that journey?
Yeah, I can do that. I do that all the time. So our vision is to cultivate a culture of physical fitness excellence. It's very aspirational, of course, but we're trying to create a culture. Again, I talk about positive professional habits, and part of our positive professional habits sit on a foundation. This is the way I describe it now. I don't know how everyone else describes it. The foundation really are those non-physical domains of sleep, nutrition, mental, and spiritual readiness. And on top of that foundation sits your physical readiness. And if any of that part of that foundation is crumbling, that physical readiness is going to suffer, right? There's going to be some gaps or some holes or some weaknesses therein. So generally the first class cadets will take, or the 2 first classes they take their freshman or plebe year, are PE 215, which is Foundations in Personal Fitness. And that's an introduction to holistic health and fitness. It's an introduction to the basics of exercise physiology. There's a sleep project in there, a sleep monitoring project. There's a nutrition project. We have a cadet fitness challenge. It's an 11-event fitness test. It doesn't take place over 1 hour or even one day, but it's various events across the domains that give a larger profile of where I am as a cadet. And then we'll focus on one of those because it's a short course. It's only 19 lessons. Focus on one of those and try to develop that using, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based goal. So that's PE 215. And the other course cadets take plebe year is PE 116, boxing. That's a change. So every cadet takes boxing. So men have been taking it since the early part of the 20th century. Women didn't begin taking it until 6 years ago. So every cadet takes boxing, and that really is our introduction to the warrior ethos. Yes, we teach boxing skills. We have to. That's what the course is. It's a necessary part. But really what we're teaching and exposing cadets to is a one-on-one confrontation where they have to manage their fear, manage their arousal, and then demonstrate their ability to make, decisions in that confrontational environment. So it's boxing. You're fighting. You're getting hit, and you're hitting others. So that's the first year. And then kind of woven through the summers, we have physical readiness training leadership. We've also, in the recent years, gotten more touch points in modern Army combatives. So then when you enter your sophomore or your third class year, we call it yearling year here, they're going to take survival swimming, which is certainly a course in the aquatic environment, right? We put them in the water, but ultimately it's an operational environment. So they're going to, when we get near the end of that course, they're in Army combat uniform to include boots, to include Molly that weighs 12 to 15 pounds and a weapon. And we're asking them to do things to get to a position of safety, to ditch that heavy equipment if necessary, and then to use their clothing as flotation devices. And all of that's being done in stressful circumstances, right? That's not comfortable to do those things. And so getting outside your comfort zone for most, not all, for most is an incredibly impactful set of experiences. And then also that second year, cadets are going to take a class called Military Movement, PE 117, very well known to our graduates over the last, many decades. It's a course that's based in applied gymnastics, jumping, landing, climbing, crawling, tumbling, traversing. In the end, the big event is the legendary indoor obstacle course test, but so many other assessments on a daily basis, from climbing a rope vertically using 4 different techniques, climbing a rope horizontally using 3 different techniques, different tumbling, different vaulting, landing, team building skills, a lot of opportunities to excel in that course. But it challenges a lot of people, again, because, we've probably come a couple of generations from when, more kids did those kind of things in their K through 12 physical education. Now, the majority do not do those kind of things. So it's very new to them. If you're athletic, or the way I would define athletic, the course is really not that difficult. But if you haven't done those things, they're new. So it's also a challenging experience for several. So that takes you through the end of your second year. In your third year, which we call cow year, that's a long story there on why they're called cows. But you're going to take modern Army combatives. We call it combat applications, but it is modern Army combatives. Our current course director, he was the one that developed the Army's current program, and we hired him 5 years ago, and he's done great things with combatives at West Point. It's what you might imagine. You're going to learn some takedown skills. You're going to learn some grappling skills. You're going to learn some submissions, and we're going to have cadets fight one-on-one. We're going to put them in that environment where winning matters and demonstrating mental toughness matters. And then also that year, they're going to take the course I've already talked about, PE 450, which is taking what they've learned in the other courses to that point and during their other experiences, especially in cadet summer training, and then applying that at the unit level. And then finally, their first class year, while they're also leading the Corps in those primary cadet officer leadership positions, they're going to take a lifetime physical activity course. And we have anything from advanced level 1 combatives to scuba to ball sports like volleyball, basketball. We do cycling class. We teach scuba. We teach downhill skiing, snowboarding. So another opportunity for cadets to explore something maybe that they haven't done before, something they've always wanted to do, and truly enjoy that last experience. It's something they can take with them, hopefully for the rest of their lives. So that wasn't really in a nutshell, but that's what our physical education program looks like. We do fitness testing twice a year, Army Combat Fitness Test. Excited about that. Now that's the test of record. And then we also have an indoor obstacle course test, which every cadet learns and takes as part of that PE 117 military movement course. And then every cadet must take and pass the indoor obstacle course test during their third year and or first class year, proximal to graduation. then finally, I've also said this: every cadet an athlete. So General MacArthur, when he's superintendent, he believed that if we have athletes, we'll have soldiers. And so he made it compulsory that each cadet participates in either the intercollegiate level, we call it core squad, the club level, or the company level, intramural athletics. So every cadet competes on a team each semester at one of those three levels. So it's an immersive environment. It's a very physical culture here. I think for outsiders that come here, they're always amazed at the amount of activity that's going on at West Point. So cadets stay busy in all things, but they're certainly staying busy in the physical domain.
Alex, what's your best obstacle course time?
I don't actually remember. I should go look it up.
I looked it up.
So I've talked to a few people when I was back at West Point. I learned while I was there. Well, was that last weekend? Was that recently?
You sent me a picture of you on the wall last week.
The last couple of weeks have been fast. I've been in DC. I've been at West Point. I'm in Alaska now. It's out of control. I learned while I was there that the system they have to monitor all of the cadets metrics, it doesn't purge data after you leave. So you can find people all the way back to like 1999, 2000 ish.
Yep.
You can look up all their stuff. And I think this is something I actually think is pretty neat. Colonel Gist probably realized it as he looked me up. There are people who, like, because of me running the Mops and Mo's page, assume that I was just like into physical fitness from the beginning and was all about it. And that is conclusively not true. I entered West Point fairly underweight. If I had like actually gone through the process the correct way, they would have like noticed that I was like under the height, the tables, but I was just told to like eat more eggs and drink more milk or something and gain a little weight. But the DPE stuff was the area I struggled with the most while I was a cadet. The academics kind of came to me easily. The physical stuff was a little bit harder. And I think there was a ton of value in kind of being forced into environments where you're uncomfortable, being forced to reckon with things that challenge you. And I got a lot out of it in terms of like, if I'd gone somewhere else for school, I don't think I would have been forced to confront those things as much. And by going through DPE, I was forced to getting over, like, the hardest part is always starting, right? So getting into the pool and dealing with some of that, or getting punched in the face a couple of times and dealing with some of that makes you realize it's not actually as scary as it might have seemed before you started. And I got a ton out of the program. So I know, like, I was an international relations major at the time, but when I go back and I visit people, I end up visiting like coaches I had in the Department of Physical Education, and it did a lot for me. I don't know if everybody else has a similar experience. Some people have some fairly painful, traumatic experiences in the department, but I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I did look you up because, like you said, you can go back to about the 2000 frame. And so I will just define it this way without getting into specifics. Alex, you demonstrated the kind of growth that we want to see from everyone, right? There's a different start point for everyone, but you demonstrated the kind of growth that was indicative of your commitment, was indicative of the type of program we have and the demands we place on cadets. But you responded to that. And my predecessor in this job at one time, he spent some time kind of trying to show what growth looks like. And I would say if we were to kind of plot your performance out, and the variables aren't always, comparable, but if we were to plot it out in kind of arbitrary units, if you will, you demonstrate the kind of growth that we want to see in cadets and in our leader development program.
Shout out, Alex.
I attribute a lot. I'll do some brief shout outs, but I attribute a lot of that to the climbing team, because I did the club side of climbing, which won't mean anything to a lot of people, but it was where I found a physical activity, a sport that I cared enough about to start getting into the training for it kind of side. Because it's to pass ACFTs and to pass minimum requirements of the Army doesn't take a whole lot. And this kind of leads me to the question I wanted to ask, is that West Point enforces a lot of physical standards that are entirely different from or higher than what the rest of the Army does. And it can be really hard in this culture to create a higher standard and then enforce that higher standard when there's this baseline that everybody knows they're not going to get kicked out as long as they meet that. What is it about the culture there and the leadership there and things like that that allow the organization to do that? Because I think that's something that the rest of the force could really benefit from.
Yeah, so I'll try to come back to current day, but I'm going to go back to when I came to West Point in 1990. And when I reported for our day, and things were kind of hectic, and your head's spinning, and there's so much going on, you really don't even know where you are, and people are using words you don't know, and there's a lot of shouting going on, and you're meeting new people. I kind of go back to the cadet role models that were the leaders around me every day. My cadet basic training platoon sergeant, cadet basic training platoon leader. We're talking about people who were just 2 or 3 years older than I was, only 2 or 3 years removed from that same experience that I had as a new cadet, when I had no idea what was going on. I didn't have a military background. I had never visited West Point. And so right away, you're immersed in this environment of excellence. And I think that excellence is by having those exemplars. So they could be moral, ethical exemplars. They can be exemplars that demonstrate presence. They could be those that have an incredible intellect. And ideally, it's someone that has some of all of those things. And when you're immersed in that environment, I think you want to be better. There's sort of an informal competition. Maybe, we'd like to say it's an internal drive for everyone. It's an intrinsic motivation. But I think at first there's a lot of extrinsic motivation, because you want to keep up. You want to be better based on everyone you see around you. That includes the staff, the faculty, the coaches, the whole environment here. So that's kind of how I saw things, or at least how I reflect on them now, 32 years removed from my first day at West Point. And then it was kind of, your peers that you became close to. I think you're always defined by the 5 closest friends, the 5 closest people around you. I think, we surround ourselves by people we want to be like. And there's a lot of very talented people that end up here for one reason or another. And everyone has their different reasons for wanting to seek out this opportunity and then ultimately to serve. But as I come forward 32 years from my R day and approximately 28 years from when I graduated and commissioned, I see it from the other side now as a department head with, a team of 70 professionals who come to work each day, and their purpose, so this kind of goes towards spiritual readiness and holistic and health and fitness. Their purpose and their why is to come to work each day and not collect a paycheck, not to mark time. It's to make cadets better, to develop leaders of character, to educate, train, and inspire. And we have people that absolutely love doing that, right? It's their purpose. It defines their passion. And when you put a lot of people like that in one place together, I think you start to see again, I would call it an informal competition or a healthy competition where everyone wants to get better. We have people in our department who they'll just take PE classes to get better, to experience things cadets are experiencing, to learn from other faculty members, to push themselves into domains or in places where they've never been pushed before. And I think that's a very positive thing to show cadets. And we have cadets that do the same thing. We have cadets that are constantly pushing themselves to be better, to seek out that next level of performance, the next challenge that's going to make them better. And so how are we able to have those high standards? One, I think that's the expectation. My parents, I think when they visit here, my dad said this, whenever he visits West Point and leaves, he feels better about our nation. And I never really thought that way. I think that way now. And I agree. I feel better about our nation, and I get to go to work here every day. I have, 7 minutes to take me walk from my house to Arvin Cadet Physical Development Center. And I get to do that every day. What an awesome privilege and opportunity. And I think when you're in an environment like that, you don't want to just settle. You want to continue to raise the bar. We bring in, we graduate 1,000 each year and bring in about 1,200 new each year. So we're kind of starting over, if you will, with the core of cadets in a way. But we always want to continue to push that bar higher and higher if we can across those 47 months or 4 years. And that's where we're able to have high standards and high expectations. And demand a lot of cadets, and, the academic program, the military program, the physical program, our character expectations in relationships, in leading their peers and following their peers. It's pretty incredible. We have, amazing talent here, but, even with all the talent, there are these, you got to have the intangibles, I guess I would call them. I read a book this past summer called Intangible. It's about professional baseball. Here we are in the postseason of Major League Baseball, but it was about the intangibles that certain players bring to that 24 or 25 person roster on a professional baseball team. And those intangibles, it's hard to define or quantify them in terms of runs scored or wins or championships. But when we see it, when we see excellence, we ought to recognize that, reinforce it, and continue to push the bar higher.
Awesome. I will, for the listeners out there, he didn't get into specifics of my grades or anything in his department, but I'm sure he noticed that my first APFT I took upon arrival, I failed it. And that's not that uncommon. I know I had classmates who failed the initial one, and by the end of basic training, you do fine.
Yep.
But I think I kind of like that, because I think there are a lot of people that work in the fitness space that fitness came naturally to them. They grew up being super athletic and super fit. And I kind of appreciate having the experience of not having it come naturally, because I think those are the people I would rather communicate with and help, are the ones who don't immediately jump into it and have a great time. I will ask you, you use the term the legendary IOCT, and it does have a certain degree of legend around it. The coach I was hanging out with early in his career, he did an internship with Army Athletics, and part of that was taking the ACFT. He mostly worked on like the intercollegiate athletics side, but they did bring them all down, and they took the ACFT when he did it, or not the ACFT, the IOCT.
Yeah.
And he still talks about that all the time as like the assessment people should be taking. What is it about the IOCT that has made it such like a foundational component of the cadet experience there? Like, why does it stay around? I don't know when it was modified or what the history is or anything like that, but what makes it such a key component of the experience? And is it the ultimate tactical assessment?
Well, I don't know if it's the ultimate tactical assessment, but it comes close. We're not in gear, so we're in shorts and t-shirts and athletic shoes. We're in a pretty environmentally temperate, the environment's pretty temperate inside Hayes Gym there. I think what makes it great is that in a couple of minutes time, in a few minutes time, we can say go, and someone can cross the finish line, and we've assessed muscular endurance, anaerobic power, aerobic capacity, agility, balance, coordination, mental toughness, and some might argue perhaps muscular strength. I'm not sure that's quite there. But it's, you're competing with yourself, you're competing against the clock, you're competing for a grade. You're pushing each other. I remember when I took it as a cadet, my roommate and I pushed each other. It was kind of our competition to, who's going to have the best time this year. So some would probably say, well, it's a rite of passage. And that's okay. There's a historical significance to the IOCT in that every graduate since the 60s has taken it, multiple times and has experienced the, when you finish an event like that, the all out exhaustion that comes with, pushing yourself to your limits. And, some would say I pushed myself beyond my limits. The reality is, if you're, a performance psychologist, you probably didn't quite get to your limits. But that's okay. If you're pushing and challenging yourself, I think the strength of the IOCT is that it's relatively short, one gymnasium. You're in there with your peers. You're not alone. You've got people watching you. So it's got that competitive atmosphere, stadium-like environment. And then we're going to take your grade, and it's going to be part of, how we assess you in the physical domain. And then the physical domain is part of how we assess cadets overall, because we believe it's that important to our profession. So I think all of those things make the IOCT, I guess I use the word legendary. Some would maybe say infamous. And there's a love-hate relationship with it. So folks in DP love it. The Corps of Cadets maybe hates it. But I run across cadets all the time that actually enjoy it. I think they enjoy, you can say, going into the pain cave. People use different terminology. Dr. Todd Crowder talks about going to the well. On the IOCT, you're going to ask maybe more of yourself than you ever have for many cadets, especially the first time they take it. And then they find that, oh, I'm okay. Yeah, that was exhausting, but I'm okay. And then the second time they take it, they make, like any curve, they make tremendous improvement. And then the third and fourth, they're still making improvement. And then they have to find creative ways to train to make those small improvements to get to whatever it is their desire to achieve, whether it's the A- or above that gets you the IOCT tab to wear on your uniform, or if it's to pass for some, or if, recently we've had a lot of cadets pursue the all-time record. The class of 2022, both male and female, currently hold the record. So it's not like it's, 50 years ago, we're still hanging on to that record. We have people pushing themselves, to seek out and demonstrate excellence each and every year. So there's so many things about the IOCT. The fact that everyone takes it, everyone must pass it to graduate. That's only relatively recent. Old grads may like to talk about the Corps has. No, the Corps has not. It's only been since the class of 2012 that you must pass the IOCT in order to graduate from the United States Military Academy. Prior to that, cadets took it. It was part of their grade, but you didn't have to pass it. It's required.
Why the change?
So I think the primary reason for the change is we think it's that important, and we think it's that high quality of a test. And we think having it as a integral part of our program demonstrates to anyone at West Point, again, staff, faculty, coaches, but especially to cadets, that a well-rounded physical fitness, and people use hybrid athlete, people use tactical athlete, whatever it is, that well-rounded fitness is what we seek in our soldiers and our leaders. And the IOCT is, I have a mentor who says cadets respond to that which is enforced. And I think the IOCT is a good example of, you have to really put some preparation in to do well in this thing. And the ACFT is now there too. The APFT, look, I'm going to be very candid here. The APFT, I could roll out of bed, do push-ups, sit-ups, and go for a 2-mile run and not be that big a deal. The ACFT, to meet the minimums, I would agree for the overwhelming majority, the minimums are not that challenging. But to do well on that test across the 6 events, it's a great assessment. I mean, I think there's a lot of, senior folks like myself, or people that have, spent time in the Department of Physical Education at West Point and in other places, that for many, many years in back rooms and offices and, backyards over a beer, talked about what their 6 event test would be. And the ACFT has gotten us pretty close to what those backyard conversations were saying.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the question I have is, has the ACFT specifically, but more broadly, sort of this shift, we mentioned it earlier, this shift towards like a more, I don't want to use the word functional fitness, but a more comprehensive testing profile, has that changed anything that you guys are doing? Or do you think the product you were generating was already capable of handling this kind of new look at Army fitness?
I think what we were doing, we were maybe better suited to maybe the broader Army, and what was going on in the broader Army. There were pockets in the Army doing great things, no doubt about it, certain units, certain leaders. But I kind of go back to, whatever the test is what people are going to train for. We don't want, I'm not a believer in training for the test. I'm a believer that in 363 days of the year, you do the right things. Those other 2 days of the year, just go have fun. It's part of building a cohesive team, and wherever your score falls, put a mark on the wall and set some new goals. But I do think the ACFT can change fitness culture, because now the demand is different, right? The demand says, I'm going to have to pick up something heavy and put it down 3 times. I'm going to have to pick this 10-pound ball up and to use a word, yeet, over my head. Get to triple extension, right? I'm going to have to generate some force very quickly to throw this ball as far as I can. And power is, hey, look, let's be honest. Power is the key to success in any physical endeavor. No one can tell me different in this. And it applies to a marathon too. Those athletes are generating an incredible amount of power across 2 hours and just over 2 hours. and then the push-up, when done properly, I think is a great assessment. The sprint drag carry, I think, is the unsung hero, or maybe it's the sung hero, the very evident hero of the test. What an awesome assessment. I kind of liken it to the indoor obstacle course test and what it demands. And then there's the fifth event, and then there's the 2-mile run. So those 6 events are they're quite demanding. Running 2 miles at the end of all that is not as easy as it was after doing push-ups and sit-ups.
Yeah, I did pieces of it the other day, and exactly talking about sprint drag carry will mess you up. And the 5th event is challenging, but there's other options I think that might have been considered.
Hey, look, the 5th event, I like the mental toughness aspect of it. I like you got to be gritty to kind of, maintain that isometric hold over an extended period of time. So, yeah.
I remember I was at Fort Drum when the initial announcement happened about the ACFT, and they discussed what the events were going to be. And being who I was and being kind of a nerd, I immediately went over. People at Fort Drum will know Atkins Fitness Center, and tried as many events as I could. I asked them if I could take a 10-pound medicine ball outside and throw it around a few times. But doing the sprint track carry for the first time is a good reality check of oh damn. If you hadn't trained anything in that quote unquote anaerobic, but really just higher intensity, short duration domain, I think I did it 3 times that day. And that was the bulk of my workout was doing 3 full effort sprint drag carries.
Yeah, that time domain has always been appealing to me personally. I've never been really good at anything. Oh no, by the way, I failed my first APFT as a cadet as well. So I'll admit that here, and anyone who hears it, that's fine. I'm fine with that. Failure is good, right? Failure drives you to improve. But yeah, the sprint drag carry in that time domain of 90 seconds to 2 minutes, kind of like the 800 on the track, or I was talking about the indoor obstacle course test. That time domain at an all-out effort, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I guess I'll invoke his name now, Dr. William Kramer. He at one time called the battlefield the anaerobic battlefield, and I would tend to agree with that based on my experiences. Is there's a lot of time where there's very low intensity activity, and then there are times when it's very high intensity, high demand activity over short durations, and it becomes intermittent in nature. And of course, I've studied high intensity interval training, so I love those kind of things like the sprint drag carry.
I was going to say, you talked about changing culture and training the test and things like that. One very evident change in the culture, having gone through the academy almost 10 years ago now to visiting a week ago, there's a visible change in that the place is covered in gym in a boxes and pull-up bars and the ability to pull out a barbell whenever you want, wherever you want, right outside your barracks. And it's pretty cool to see that activity going on. I know when I was you talked about the level of activity there are always people running around doing stuff. But when I was there, a huge percentage of that was just going for runs all the time and maybe finding a little patch of grass to do some push-ups or find a place to do some pull-ups or whatever it was. But the increased presence of resistance training in the culture is massive. And I see some of these videos of cadets in their class uniform hitting powerlifting totals between classes and just absolutely ludicrous stuff. But that's a pretty obvious kind of culture change and scenery change in the last few years.
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to now Major General Curtis Buzzard, the commander at the Maneuver Center now, and he was the commandant, made a big push to make that happen. And then, kind of by happenstance, we wouldn't have liked to have gone through it, but those gems in a box paid a lot of dividends during the pandemic when we had, the necessity to be outside and not in a lot of people in close spaces like gymnasiums. I mean, gyms closed all around the world, but we had some options still at West Point, so he should get a lot of credit for that.
Well, I'll ask one, because one of the most common messages I get from people on the page is hey, how do I get involved in human performance stuff? How do I get involved in H2F? How do I do these kinds of jobs? Because they're really appealing to people. And one of the ways to do that, at least if you're an officer, is to come teach in the Department of Physical Education.
Mhm.
What does that require, and what does that path look like if somebody's interested in that, taking their career in that direction?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think we're always trying to find creative ways to cast our net a little more widely. So our faculties, our entire department's 72 folks, but our faculty is 46 people. 22 of those are military and 24 are civilian. We call them Title 10 faculty here at the Military Academy. So I'll talk about the military. The majority of our military faculty are what we call junior rotators. So they're officers, post company command, doing a broadening assignment, and we're able to be very selective in bringing them back to West Point. So those who went to school here kind of know what DPE is, have a general idea of what it entails. So we speak to those who probably have demonstrated, the attributes here to potentially come back and teach. We meet with them at the end of every year. We meet with the first class cadets and hope to inspire them, or at least give them information on the opportunity, and then ask them to open a file. And they can open it at any time on an application called Teach, TEACH, on the westpoint.edu website. And then just stay in touch with us. And then after that, it's really about timing and doing great things in the Army as a company grade officer, because we want to bring back officers who are role models, and not just in presence and physical fitness, but in solving complex problems, mentally agile, striving for impeccable character. But no doubt a propensity to demonstrate outstanding physical fitness and then teach that is an important component. So at about the 4 or 5 year mark post commissioning is when officers ought to start throwing materials in their file. So OERs, officer record brief, seeking out letters of recommendation, taking the graduate record exam, hoping, not hoping, that's not the right word, lining up their career timeline such that they have a successful company command and then have that opportunity to go to graduate school and then do a 3-year utilization tour. So the cycle is we're getting ready to have a board now for year groups 16, 17, and 18. Can't believe we're already that far along. But we're getting ready to have a board for those year groups where we'll take a look at the applicants, we'll make selections, and then we'll finalize our selections in January, so in 3 months. And then those officers, once screened and approved by Human Resources Command, would start graduate school a year and a half later, do a year of a master's program at Texas A&M, Indiana University, or UNC Greensboro. And then right immediately following that year of a master's degree, come to West Point and serve a 3-year utilization tour in our department. It's a competitive pool of applicants, and we're looking for diversity in a number of different ways. So men, women, different commissioning sources, different backgrounds. And it doesn't not have to be physical education, exercise science, or kinesiology background, although that is oftentimes, what spurs an interest. So it's very competitive, and we pick about 6 per year, and we're on a 3-year cycle. So we have approximately 18, 19 slots of those 22 are those junior rotating officers. And we're picking 6 a year out of a pretty large applicant pool. So very competitive. Also looking for different branches as well. But by no means does someone have to be an elite swimmer, an elite gymnast, an elite boxer, an elite fighter to come to the Department of Physical Education. Our officers come with great backgrounds, and then we teach them how to teach. And that's where our civilian faculty comes into play. They're sort of like the NCO backbone of you, if you will. They represent the continuity in the department, subject matter expertise, and have long careers. And we have our longest serving civilians in his 34th year right now. Unfortunately, he's going to retire in August, Dr. Jeff Quello. We have, I think, 3 or 4 others that are approaching that 30th year. Well, Dr. Todd Crowder's in his 33rd year. We have a few others approaching 30 years. And then on the other end, we have some younger faculty who've just been here a few years. So there's, we're looking again, to cast our net as widely as we can, but the folks that want to pursue physical education at the undergraduate and graduate level and then come teach it in the way that we teach it, that pool's pretty small. But the quality we're able to get is still really high. So we're proud of that. But yeah, visit westpoint.edu, look for the Department of Physical Education, and you'll get all the information you need. If not, send us an email, make a phone call, and we'll get you all the information you need.
Awesome.
I've got kind of I guess we'll call it sort of a closing question, but from a growth standpoint and looking forward, and again, I harken back to sort of the ACFT, the way that the Army's changing its thoughts around fitness and readiness. For your department specifically, and maybe even touching on West Point at large, but like what are some kind of key milestones you're looking at and some key sort of hurdles you're looking at overcoming in the next couple of years?
For our faculty, or just the West Point in general?
Just West Point in general, and then the department specifically when it comes to teaching and learning and preparing these cadets to step into this like quote unquote new Army.
Yeah. I think a big part of it has been over the last 2 years and will continue to be in the coming years is to continue to integrate holistic health and fitness into our curriculum and into our culture. H2F or and you could put an equal sign, human performance optimization. It's not necessarily a new concept, but it is for the Army. And so the Army is a large organization. And so our ability to influence the core of cadets, who then 1,000 of them each year go out into the Army and can influence the H2F or fitness culture in the Army is a positive thing. So we're going to continue to reinforce that within our curriculum. Gosh, that was a tough question. You kind of caught me off guard with this one. I would love to be able to find a way, and I had a discussion with a member of the admissions committee a couple of weeks ago. I would love for us to find creative ways to use our, limited resources, because our resources are pointed towards the Corps of Cadets, right? There's 4,400 of them. But to use our limited resources to in some way try to influence at least cadet candidates and those that are propensed to serve, but maybe in some ways, and this is probably a reach, hoping to influence, and this is huge, like big dreamy type stuff here, influence fitness culture in our society if we can. So there's a lot of times now that when I talk to people who either are parents of young children or who are likely going to be parents of young children, hey, get your kids outside to play. Get them involved in multiple sports. They don't need to play one sport early on year round. If that happens later on because of success, okay. But get them in multiple sports year round. Get them outside, let them play, let them scratch their knees and elbows. They'll be okay. I'm not saying to get in fights, but if they get in a little bit of a scrap, it'll be okay. Experience those kind of things, because there are members of our department that have joked, and maybe it's not much of a joke, but hey, we don't need a fitness test. What I want you to do, and they're talking to a young person aspiring to come to West Point. What I want you to do is go climb that tree and then come back down safely. Then go swim across that slow moving river. Then when you get to the other side, pick up a few rocks and throw them at that tree over there and try and hit that target, right? And those are the kind of things that if you're doing those on a day-to-day basis, you're kind of instilling the movement patterns that humans have always meant to have. We're not meant to sit in chairs and lay in beds and eat Cheetos and watch TV. We do that. That's the world we live in now. I get it, but get outside and play. So if we can get kids in a safe environment outside and playing and being creative and using their minds to, connect to their bodies and their bodies to connect to their minds, we're getting closer to what, a lot of early societies did out of necessity. But if we can bring some of that back, I don't know that DP or West Point can influence that, but if we could in some way, that'd be great.
Well, shout out to my hosts right now. I'm up here in Palmer, Alaska. It's roughly freezing outside. They have 3 small kids in the house. And as gracious hosts and to help facilitate a good recording environment for the podcast, their mom sent them all outside to play right as I was starting. So like they have a pile of toys and trampoline, and they're minimally supervised and just told to kind of go
Yeah.
figure it out and entertain yourself. So
That's what kids will do. And I'll circle this back to Hayes Gym. So those that have never, maybe those that are listening or have or have not been to West Point, if you come visit Hayes Gym. When you walk in, what you're going to see is a gym that goes back to, previous generations. The environment is safe as long as you kind of mitigate the small risks that are in there. But if we were to put children in that gym, the adults would walk out, close the doors. The children would have an incredible time and want to come back day after day. That's what kids want to do. So if we can provide them those opportunities, I think they're going to be better off in so many different ways.
I can't think of a better closer, Alex, unless you've got one.
no, I can't live up to that one.
Well, Colonel Gist, thank you for coming on. I mean, this was an inspirational look at kind of what you guys are doing up there. So thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, it's Alex. Hope you liked the episode. If you found it useful or enjoyed the conversation, please give us a rate and review on whatever platform you listen on. And we'd also appreciate if you're on Instagram, following the page. And if you want to reach out, DMs are always good, or you can email us at mopsandmoes@gmail.com. That's MOPSNMOES@gmail.com. See you next week.